Good morning, Yaakov. Can you hear me? Let me see if I can hear you.
La, la, la.
Baruch Hashem. All right. All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Mem Gimel. Before we give a synopsis of Daf Mem Gimel, I would love to repeat an amazing word from the Shem Yishmuel on the opening of this Perek, on Perek Ve'elo Oivrin, that the Mishnah mentioned 4 items that are what we call our Taroivis Chometz. Kuta Chabavli, Sheikhar Amadai, Chometz Oadoimi, and Zisoim Hamitzri. So says the Shem Yishmuel that here you mention all of the 4 Golosim. Golos Mitzrayim, Mamach It's Gavaldik, Golos Bavel, Golos Madai, and Golos Edom. And Ve'elu Oivrin, that we should know that all of the Golosim will be taken away from, will pass over us, we will pass over it through the merit of Pesach. And through the merit of Pesach doesn't only mean through the fulfillment of the mitzvah of Pesach on Pesach, but it also is through learning. Through learning Masechtas Pesachim, we'll get rid of the entire Golos, including the final Golos Edom. Okay, now we're going to start on Daf Mem Gimel, quoting a machlekes that we're going to have more later on Daf Mem Ches. Machlekes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, how to define shiur. And this is really behemshach to the sugi that we're learning. We're learning about not mamish chametz. We're learning about chametz that was mixed into permitted foods, ta'aroivas chametz. We're learning about chametz nuksha, defective chametz. Defective chametz means that it's chametz that's not edible to people. It can be edible by animals. It's not edible to people. A very important just approach to better understand chametz nuksha. Svika mentioned yesterday, what about the soul? Not roi lachilas adam, not roi lachilas kelev. The rule is very important to remember. When it comes to chametz, any chametz that was edible, but now it's starting to get its taste spoiled, now it's getting ruined, the halacha is that until it's ruined to the point that it's not roi lachilas kelev, it still has a bonafide din of chametz. Chametz nuksha means something that from the outset was never edible. That's different. So if something from the outset was never edible to people, even if it's always roi lachilas kelev, it's called defective chametz. And that was one of the 2 categories that we learned in the Mishnah, that it's taka asur, and it's asur midoy raisa, and there's a lav, but you're not chayv kares if you eat chametz nuksha on Pesach. So connected to chametz nuksha will be the sugya of shiur. Shiur, we're not talking about yeast. We're not talking about seyur. Shiur means dough that's beginning to become chametz, but it's not yet full-fledged chametz. And we're going to go through the various stages that first the dough becomes pale. Then you have small cracks in the dough. Then those cracks begin to interlace with each other. And we're going to see a machlokes tanoim, at what state is it called shiur, which means something that's beginning to become chametz. At what stage is it called chametz gamur? We're going to learn in Daf Mem Gimel the source from where we know that women, that nashim, are included both in the prohibition and in the penalty of eating chametz. We're going to learn it from a hekesh. We're going to learn on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis Tosfos and how to learn properly a hekesh. And God willing, we will start today at the end of Daf Mem Gimel the sugya that's called Kol Yisurim Shabbat Torah Ein Heter Mitzaref Le'Iser. In other words, when you have a permitted substance that's combined with a forbidden substance, you have chaylev, but you don't have a kazayas of chaylev. You have a half a kazayas of chaylev, and you have a half a kazayas of basar, and you eat them together. So you ate a kazayas. We don't say, ooh, you ate a kazayas of chaylev. We don't say that because Ein Heter Mitzaref Le'Iser, but there are exceptions. One exception is Isurei Nazir, as we'll speak out. And the other exception will be chametz. And that's how this will link into the sugya of chametz. Without any further ado, let us start here on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph. We left off by the 2 dots, 9 lines from the top of the Amid. After the Mishnah enumerated 7 and then 8 different types of either taroivus chametz or chametz nuksha, the Mishnah said, Zaklal, that kol shumi min dagan, right? Anything that is made from dagan and it's chametz, right? Even though it's taroivus or even though it's only nuksha. So the Mishnah says you're over on Pesach, right? There is an hazara, there is a lav. However, there was no penalty of kares, which is reserved for eating mamish chametz. Says the Gemara, Tanya Amar Rabbi Yeshua, that the achar sheshoninu kol shehu min dagan hareyu over bepesach, and that klal includes taroivus chametz and it includes chametz nuksha. So lamu manu chachamim eselu. Why did the Mishnah have to give all these examples? Now, really, to clarify the kasha of the Gemara, the top toisvis, the second line, the Ri explains what the Gemara is asking is not that the Mishnah should not have given any examples. That's not the way of a Tana. You give examples, but why do you need to have 7 examples? The Mishnah was speaking about 2 different categories, chametz nuksha, taroivus chametz first, and then chametz nuksha. So look inside the toisvis, that the leihava leila hashmein and ela treminayu. One should be nuksha be'ene, nuksha that's not mixed with anything else, just that never, from the outset, it never became properly edible chametz. And v'chad aladei taroivus. That was the kasha of the Gemara. That is the kasha of the Gemara. Why all the examples? Answers the Gemara, kidei sheyiye rogel bohen ubishmoiseyim. Because people should be familiarized with the names of all of the examples the Mishnah gave. So, for example, we say kuta chababli, which also just implies that that dip was eaten by the Babylonians. It was not eaten in Eretz Yisrael. They found it disgusting in Eretz Yisrael. But now that we learn about kuta chababli, and why can't you have kuta chababli? No one knows what it is. Obviously, now we know there's bread in it. It's like a moldy bread, but there's bread in there. So now when people will hear kutach, they will know, there's chametz in there. In other words, when it's so chamer, the Isur Pesach, it's kedai to give all these examples for people to become familiarized with food items that they might not necessarily know from their day-to-day living, but they'll know it from Torah. And that's going to save them not only from not eating chametz, but it's going to be b'chlal a good thing, as the Gemara gives a story. There was that Westerner. It's funny, the people that lived in Eretz Yisrael, they were called the Bar Marava because Bavel was towards the east, is to the east of the Holy Land. So he once went to Bavel, and Hava Bisra Bahade, he had meat with him, and he was eating a meal. And Amar Lahu, he tells the Chaver around the table, Kiribuli Maschilta, please pass me that dip. Now that dip was kuta chabavli. He had no idea that dip has in it milk. He had no idea. So Shama the Kamru, so he heard that people say, Kiribuli kutach, taka pass the kutach to him. So Kivan the Shama kutach, when he heard that the dip that they are passing is called kutach, he learned the Mishnah. The Mishnah is speaking about kutach because it has bread in it. But we also know from the Gemara that kutach has in it the moldy, the rotten, sour milk. There's milk in there. So it's milchix. So when he heard that they're passing him kutach, Peiresh, he didn't have it. Had the Mishnah not enumerated all these examples, he b'shoigeg would have consumed basar b'chalav midrabanan. Midoraisa basar b'chalav is only when you cook them together, but midrabanan, as we all know, we may not eat it together. We may not even eat it one apart from the other. But it's kedai to know all of the names, all of the different food items. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol v'dvarim. Okay, good. Says the Gemara. Weiter. The Mishnah says, Harei Elu, both taroivus chametz and chametz nuksha are both ba'azara. That means that it's asan midoraisa. You're violating a lav, but there's no isur kares. Now the Gemara points out that if we know other works of Tanoim, it's not so pasha to find who is the author of our Mishnah, because as we will see, we have a Tana that holds that ta'aroivus chametz is asur midoraisa. We have another Tana that holds chametz nuksha is asur midoraisa. But a Tana that says they are both asur ba'azara, that is our Mishnah. But the question is, man Tana, who is the author of our Mishnah that holds the chametz Dagan Gomur. That either if you have something that's mamish chametz, that's roi lachilas adam, and then it was mixed, even though it's mixed, it's still asur ba'azara. And also, nuksha, defective chametz, be'ene, that it's not mixed with anything else. But from the outside, it was never edible, that they are both prohibited under the penalty of a lav. It's both ba'azara, it's both midoid aisa. So we're going to have a beautiful machlokes amoirayim. The machlokes amoirayim will really depend, when you put these two together, which one of these two is considered more kal and which one is more chamur. And that will be important. So Rav Yehuda, the Amoira, Amarav, that our Mishnah is authored by Rabbi Meir. What Rabbi Meir are we referring to? The Tanya of this Braisa elaborates that which we will learn in the Mishnah Daf Mem Ches Amud Beis regarding siur, not seir. Siur means partially leavened dough. So let me explain the 3 steps of what happens to dough, how it becomes chametz. First, when you mix the flour with water, it's not chametz. But when you let it rest, it's not about the dough rising, it's about the surface of the dough becoming pale, or the surface of the dough whitening. Now, obviously, we are hearing the words, and you have to have shimush to properly see that. But the step number 1 is the dough is whitening. Step number 2 is that it develops cracks, the Lashon Chazal, kekarnei chagavim, like the antennas of grasshoppers. In other words, very thin, very small cracks. Step number 3 is that these cracks lengthen and they interlace one with the other. Now, Rabbi Meir holds in the Mishnah Daf Mem Ches that when the surface becomes pale, now it's called siur. It began to become chametz. Once step number 2 comes, which is that it has cracks in it, even though there's still very little, only like kekarnei chagavim, this is bona fide chametz gomer. The Tanach Rabbi Yehuda goes a step ahead in both. He says when the surface of the dough turns pale, it's still complete, not chametz. You can make matzah out of it. You can eat it on Pesach. Only when step number 2 happens, which is when it starts to develop cracks, this is called siur. And only when the cracks lengthen and they interlace, that is called chametz gomer. In other words, L'Rav Meir, you have something that's already beginning to become chametzdik, that L'Rab Yehuda, it's still not chametz altogether. So we learned in a Braisa, listen to the words, siur, even though siur is not full developed chametz, but you have to burn it, which means that it's already midai raisa asur b'hana'ah. Now guys, siur, like chametz nuksha, is an item that is not edible. And Tzvika here, just to repeat something that you mentioned yesterday, I just want to chazer this over. The Magen Avraham makes it very clear. Anything that was edible, roi lachilas adam, that's chametz, remains chametz gomer, even if it's ruined, even if now it's not edible to people, still chametz. By chametz, it only becomes nothing when it's not even roi lachilas kelov. But that's only because it was at one point edible to people. Nuksha, which is a very generic word, defective chametz. One example of nuksha will be siur. It's not edible. Now, animals will eat it, will eat the dough, but it's not yet edible, it's dough. Siur, that's included in the isur of chametz nuksha. Now, chametz nuksha, as we're learning in our Mishnah, as we have over here in this Braisa, has to be burnt. It's taka asur midoraisa, not only asur b'achila, it's asur b'hana. There's no isur kares. But it's asur b'hana. The problem with the Braisa is that after the Braisa establishes that even though it only began to become chametz, you have to burn it, which means you can't have hana. The next word, the next clause, the noisnei lekalbei, but you can give it to your dog. Gavaldik. That's the way the Tanaim wrote to keep us on our toes. It contradicts each other. We're going to have to figure out how to learn the Braisa. And then the ha'ichloi, if you eat it, ba'arboim, that underlines that it's an isur doiraisa. So asks the Gemara in this Braisa, upa, hogufa kasha, omnat, you begin by saying that siur, once it hits the level of siur, not only is it asur with malchus, but you have to burn it. That's the word. Yisarif, alma asur b'hana, and v'hadar totani, noisnei lefnei kalboi, alma mutar b'hana. It's an inherent contradiction. So answers the Gemara, I'll tell you how to learn pshat in the Braisa. Hachi ka'amar, siur yisarif. Now, what is siur? So well, did Rav Meir, let Rav Meir. Shiur, that is, like we mentioned, Rav Meir is the more machmir. The surface became pale, that's already shiur, lit Rav Meir, that has to be burnt only according to Rav Meir, right? Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, when the surface of the dough turns pale, before it develops any cracks, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's mamash not chametz at all. So the Brisa wants to tell you, you have to burn it. Now, what is shiur? The Brisa is not going into. The Rav Meir, lit Rav Meir. Same thing, the Rabbi Yehuda. Once step number 2 happened, which is that not only is the surface pale, but it has small little cracks, which, by the way, according to Rav Meir, that's chametz gamur. There, if a person eats it, he's not the loy karbayim. There, he's chayiv karas already. The Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbi Yehuda. Step number 1. The next line in the Brisa is the noisnei lifnei kalboy, which means that if the shiur is only shiur as defined by Rabbi Meir, which means that the surface is pale, but there is no cracks, which means that according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's garnished. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, give it to your dog. Really, Rabbi Yehuda could have said, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can eat it. But shiur is not edible. Just, just a practical example. There is a phase where even though one Tanach calls it shiur, the other Tanach says you can give it to, you can use it. And now the last clause in the Brisa, the ha'oichloi, if you eat shiur, you're chayiv malchus. But I want you to know, says the Gemara, that that's not Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Aside of when is it called shiur, whenever it's called shiur and not yet chametz gamur, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're not going to be chayiv malchus. Because something that from the outset is never edible, which is under the general umbrella of chametz nuksha, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're not chayiv malchus. Not every Tanach holds, like we learned in our Mishnah, that even chametz nuksha is bahazora, takanat kodesh, but you're going to get malchus. This only goes lit of Meir. So kaidem kol, we are finding a source that chametz nuksha is asur midorais. Now we want to know who our Mishnah is. Our Mishnah mentions chametz nuksha is chayiv malchus, and chametz taroiv is chametz is asur. So the Amoira Rav Yehuda holds that if chametz nuksha is asur midorais chayiv malchus, then chametz alidei taroiv is for sure. Even though it was never edible, so therefore Rav Yehuda holds logically the kolchchein, this Tanach, which is Rav Meir, will hold that chametz dog and gamur, even though you mixed it with other permissible foods, but he holds that Rav Yehuda holds that taroivus chametz is more chamur. So by the kal yechayev malchus, by the chamur yechayev malchus. Rav Nachman rejects Rav Yehuda. It's a beautiful machlokes here, because Rav Nachman holds that chametz nuksha is worse than chametz alidei taroivus. So just because Taka we find the source that Rabbi Meir Taka holds, no doubt that chametz nuksha, which is shiur, is chayiv malchus, that's not going to be a proof that chametz alidei taroivus, which according to Rav Nachman is more kal. So Rav Nachman has to find a Tana that says chametz taroivus chametz is chayiv malchus. And then he'll make the kal v'chomer in the opposite direction, l'shitasoi. Rav Nachman Amar, no, our author, the author of our Mishnah is the Tana Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer does not opine in chametz nuksha, but Rabbi Eliezer writes explicitly that taroivus chametz is chayiv malchus. The Tanya, al chametz dagan gamur anush kares. Ale ruvai taroivus chametz, even though there's no kares, but it's still asur midoraisa belav. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, the Chachamim hold, they disagree with that. Al chametz dagan gamur, here, that's a pasuk in the Chumash. Everyone holds your anush kares. But the ale ruvai beloy klum. And here you have the Rif writes that don't understand that beloy klum means you're not oived, you are oived. It's that you won't get punished for it. And in that, there's the big machlokes between the Rishonim. Does that mean that you're violating an Isser Doiraisa, but there's no punishment? Or maybe Lachachamim, you're only violating an Isser Derabanan, but that machlokes is B'chlal not Negeya over here. What we have over here is that we have Rav Meir clearly holds chametz nuksha. One example is shiur, chayiv malchus. The Tana Rabbi Eliezer holds taroivus chametz, chayiv malchus. That we have clearly. And again, depending on which one of the two is kal, which one is chamur, you'll have a kal v'chomer. So Rav Yehuda goes in the direction that our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, because once you know that you hold chametz nuksha, then for sure taroivus chametz is chayiv malchus. Rav Nachman holds no, they have to go in the opposite direction. Chametz nuksha is much more chamur. just finding it of Meir that Yechayiv on Chametz Nuksha won't prove that Yechayiv Malkus for Taroivus Chametz. You have to find a Tana that holds Yechayiv Malkus even for Taroivus Chametz. That's Rabbi Eliezer. And now you have a Kal V'chomer. That's not Rav Nachman's words. V'shmeinu Rabbi Eliezer, he says explicitly, Domer Chametz Dagan Gomor, Alalei Taroivus is Belav, so Ibazoi V'kol Shnei Nuksha, which is worse. Why is it worse? Because at least it's Be'enei. It's distinct. It's not mixed. Now, I know it's not edible. It was never edible yet, but still. Okay. Now, with Rav Nachman, my Tamil Amrik Rav Yehuda, we just spoke this out by heart. The first wide line, you can't say that our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, because Rav Nachman will hold, Amalach Dilma, At Kan Lek Amar Rav Meir Hassan, Ela Nuksha Be'enei. Rav Nachman holds Chametz Nuksha is more Chamor. Avol Chametz Dagan Gomor, Aladei Taroivus, it's mixed. Maybe not. Rav Yehuda, my Tamil Amrik Rav Nachman, because he holds the opposite. Amalach At Kan Lek Amar Rav Eliezer Hassan, because when you have Chametz Dagan, even though you mix it with permissible foods, but at least the chametz is mamash bona fide chametz. Yeah, Rabbi Eliezer holds Yechayiv Malkus, but we would never hold that he would also hold chametz nuksha be'enei, maybe not. Lo yamar. The kid said, each one, l'shita sayu, goes in the opposite direction with the Kal V'chomer, but our Mishnah again is either l'Rav Yehuda, Rabbi Meir, and our Mishnah is authored l'Rav Nachman, Rabbi Eliezer. Gavaldik. Now the Gemara says, Tanya Kavosi de Rav Yehuda says, and boy, Kol Machmetzes Loy Soichelu. And the word, the limud now, at least in the beginning, is going to come from the expression Machmetzes. So the rabbis, Kutach Habavli, this is, guys, Kutach Habavli is Taroivus Chametz, right? Because the Chametz in the Kutach was edible. Elamatz, it's a minority in it. Normally it would be bottled. No, the Pesach, there's any chametz in it, you can't have it. Okay. Like we learned yesterday, they put barley in there. So Yochel Yehi Anush Kadais. This is Antaroivus Chametz. So Talmud Loimer ki kol oichel chametz v'nichresa, not ki kol oichel machmetzes. To get kaddish, you have to eat chametz. Al chametz dagan gamur, that's not mixed into anything else, and you're having a kazayas of it. That's when you're anush kaddish. But the aliruvay, you're taka chayiv from kol machmetzes loy soichelu. You're chayiv alav alav. Nekuda. Says the Gemara, man shamat lei do amar aliruvay berav. Don't forget that Rav Meir never explicitly spoke about taroivus chametz. Rav Meir spoke about shiur. So here you have a Tana that's speaking explicitly without an author. Without an author, that Yechayiv Malkis, that's Rabbi Eliezer. This Brisa doesn't mention Chametz Nuksha. You know why the Brisa doesn't mention Chametz Nuksha? Shmamino, because Taka, the author of this Brisa, which is Rabbi Eliezer, who holds, the way Rabbi Yehuda holds, that Chametz, Taroivus Chametz, is more Chamor, Taka, Rabbi Eliezer will hold, Rabbi Eliezer Leisley. He won't hold that Yechayiv for Chametz Nuksha. Chametz Nuksha is not as serious as Taroivus Chametz, which is the Shita of Rav Yehuda. Now, says the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer, Eruve Bilav Minoli. So let's go. Now that we established that this Braisa is the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer, exactly how did he learn it from? And again, the Havamina is that he learned it from the word Machmetzes. I got myself a problem now. Because the next pasuk that this Braisa wrote, right? Akiyachi, Kadesnami L'chayiv, because there is a pasuk, there is another pasuk that writes, listen to this, Ki kol oichel machmetzes v'nichresa. The Torah links Kades also with machmetzes. Answers the Gemara, no. That machmetzes, ahu, miboyle l'chedatanya. And skip the parentheses. There is another interesting nuance when it comes to chametz. There are certain items that became chametz on their own. When you mix flour and water and you let it rest, at a certain point, even if you did not put yeast in it, even if you didn't put something in it that raises it on, that makes it into chametz, it can become chametz on its own. Now, theoretically, there is a difference, the seichel, between something that became chametz on its own, which is more problematic, and something else that needed yeast to make it chametz, that needed an external source to make it chametz. One might have thought something that only became chametz through an external source is not as bad. One might have thought so. Which I would have thought, only chametz and it's chametz me'elov. But machmas davar acher. But if you have chametz, but it only became chametz because, let's say, you put yeast in it. How do you know that you are also prohibited under the penalty of kares? So this is what we learn from the kol machmetzes v'nichrasa. So yeah, machmetzes is being marbe, but it's not going to be marbe taroivas chametz. It's going to be marbe something that became chametz al yidei davar acher. Problem is that what's the source of Rabbi Eliezer that you chayiv on a lav on taroivas chametz? The source was because the Torah says kol machmetzes lo yisaychelu. But why don't we say the same thing? That kol machmetzes lo yisaychelu, the word machmetzes is inclusive, but it's only including something that became chametz al yidei davar acher. How can you now use the kol machmetzes to be marba taroivas chametz? Yachi the lav nami lo chidasem. You have to be consistent. So the Gemara says you're right. The expression machmetzes includes that which became chametz only through davar acher. How do we also know the Braisa here, which we know is Rabbi Eliezer, that kuta chabavli is asur b'lav, that taroivas chametz is asur b'lav? It's from the word kol, not from the word machmetzes. It says kol, all is extra. Mikol. So now we're back to the kasha. The pasuk of Kodesh also uses the word kol. So why don't we say that if you eat taroivas chametz, you're chayiv Kodesh? Hassan siv koil. Answers the Gemara, no, by the koil, by Kodesh, that I need for women. If not for an extra limud, I would not have known that women are included in the prohibition and in the penalties of chametz. So the call is needed for l'rabbi snashim. So there's not by the pasuk of Kodesh. So that it's not left, it's not freed to be marbe taroivas chametz and taka. Taroivas chametz is not included in the Kodesh. Asks the Gemara, why do you b'chlal need an extra word to be marbe women? That doesn't make sense. We have a klal. Nashim midrav Yehuda marav nafke. Right, second to last line in the Amid. And v'chein tomid Rabbi Shmuel, that when it says in Parshas Nosoi, in the context of if someone steals from the other, God forbid, and then they swear falsely, that whole parsha. So it says, ish or isha kiyasu mikol chatlis adam. Really, the pasuk continues that for ashma hanefesh ahi. For ashma doesn't only mean that they are guilty; it means that they require punishment. And here the Torah says isha isha. So this is a very important lav. This is an important limit for the whole Torah. The last line of the Amid, that hishve hakosiv, you have to reflip the girsa. Isha leish l'choil onchin shabbat Torah. In other words, since the Torah says v'ashma hanefesh ahi, which means that they are both liable to punishment. If you're liable to punishment, that means that you transgressed. So it means that whenever God says you may not do something, even if it seems like the lashon is a little lashon zachar, even where the Torah did not write isha isha, when God says don't do something, a default, it's for men and for women, and not only are they both included in the prohibition, they're both included in the punishment. It's important to remember this. You can even see, look on the side, this is quoted in Sukkah Yavamas and Babakaman to Modanid and Kedusha. This is all over the place. So why would you think that women are exempt from the whole prohibition of eating chametz, for which you have to say that the kol is needed to be marba nashim, so there's nothing left for taroivas chametz? Why do I need a special limit by Pesach to be marba nashim? Answers the Gemara, Itzrach, you do need. There's a reason why you would think that when it comes to Pesach, women should be excluded. Why would you think so? Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis. Oh, let's learn a hekish. Salkadai Tachamina, ho, you look safe. And here we're quoting a pasuk in Parshas 3a. Number one, the guy's one pasuk. Lo yisoichal olav chametz shivas yom. Chametz. Sorry, kama. Lo yisoichal olav chametz. Then the pasuk says shivas yomim toichal olav matzos. The Torah juxtaposes the isur of achilas chametz with the mitzvah of eating matzah. We're going to learn many pratim about the shivas yomim toichal olav matzos. Just to make it clear, you're not obligated to eat matzah for 7 days, but good, you're obligated to eat it ba'erev. But there's a connection, there is a juxtaposition, there is a hekesh between the isur of chametz and the mitzvah of eating matzah. So you would have thought, this is a havamina, this is not the emes, but the havamina is that kol sheyesh l'mikom achol matzah, only those who are obligated to eat matzah, yesh l'mibal toichul chametz, are included in the isur of eating chametz. Again, the Havamina would be that women are not obligated to eat matzah. Don't worry, it's not that way. But this would be the Havamina. Why would you think that women are not obligated to eat matzah? Because this is a bona fide mitzvah saseh shazman gerama. Because the Havamina mitzvah shazman gerama, and as we learn in Kedushin, women are exempt thereof. So based on the Havamina premise that women are not obligated to eat matzah, now you have a hekesh. The plater puts together matzah and not eating chametz. So you would have thought, so, and that's why the general rule that is taught by the Yehuda Marav, by the Rabbi Yishmael, that Isha Yisha Kiyasa Mikol Chatas Adam, that Hishva Kos of Isha Leish, we would not apply this to the Isur of Chametz. So that's why Komash Malan in the pasuk of Kaddish where it says Kol cannot be emptied, freed to be marba taroives chametz. Taroives chametz is not Kaddish because the Kol is used for you not to make the mistake. Don't make the hekesh. Now that we have the call, now we're going to make the hekesh in the opposite direction. The hashta, the israbul huba balteichel chametz, because it says ki kol hoichel chametz with anyone, even women. So now we're going to make the hekesh in the opposite direction. Israbina belechilas matzah. Now take matzah is a mitzvah saseh shazman gerama, but now the Torah puts them together, and this is like taught by Rabbi Elazar. Kid Rabbi Elazar. To Amar Rabbi Elazar, Nashim Chayav is Bachilas Matzah Dvar Torah. I mitzvah saseh shazman gerama. He uses this pasuk because since it says Leiseichel olav chametz v'goymer, right? Shivas yamam techel olav matzahs. So now say Kol sheyesh l'mabal techel chametz. Whoever is included in not eating chametz, and now we know from the Kol by the V'nichrasa, women cannot eat chametz. So they are also midda oiraisa yesh le bachilas matzah. Because of the call, so okay, before we go weiter in the Gemara, guys, the top Tosfos is Mamash Yisoid. Because, we are familiar with Hekeshin, we have them all over. The Torah is Makish, 2 mitzvahs, right? Don't eat chametz first, then eating matzah. So look inside the top Tosfos. Temality. Right, salkadaitach. Divrei masal salkadaitach amin. Temality, hey salkadaitach. Lemidrash. What was even the Havamina to say that you can go in both directions, guys? Eating matzah is a mitzvah saseh shazman gerama. I get that, but not eating chametz, alav. Same Mishnah and Kedushin. In the negative prohibitions, all women are bound. In the thou not, don't do this, don't do that. Not doing doesn't take up any time. Doing takes up time. So why was even the Havamina to be makish the chametz to matzah based on the premise that matzah is taka mitzvah saseh shazman gerama? No, why would we lachatchila not say the opposite? The Torah says don't eat chametz, then it says eat matzah. So I would, from the outset, I should think that automatically this includes women. Why do I even need the call? Whoever is included in the lav of not eating chametz, should be mechuyev to eat matzah. Now, by the way, that's the maskana. But we needed first the call to why? And Tosfos says adarabah yesh lidrosh lechumra. Yesh lidrosh the lechumra makshinam. That's the kash. So whenever a hekesh, the Torah puts together 2 dinim. How do you know in what direction to run the hekesh? So there is a rule darshanet lechumra. If you're going to apply that rule over here, I don't need the call. So Tosfos says, no, it's not so pashut that you always make the hekesh l'chumra. V'oimari, the salka daitoch, the urche dekra, when you learn a pasuk and you're making a hekesh, guys, it's good to remember, I'm talking to myself to remember this, that the seifa mefarish l'reisha. Not in either direction. The general rule of a hekesh is when Hashem says one rule, then Hashem juxtaposes another rule, and we are supposed to learn something from this hekesh. The system is that the latter explains the former. The latter in this pasuk, the seifa, is about eating matzah. Eating matzah is a mitzvah saseh shazman gerama. If not for the call, the way to ruin the hekesh, it's good. Now you have to remember this to see how this always fits in all the hekesh. We're not saying that you can't go both ways. You can go many times, you're makish a aleph to beis and then beis to aleph. But when you begin to learn a hekesh, we learn 2 klalim and Tosfos. L'chumra makshinan, even when you use the seifa to teach the reisha, sometimes you can use it l'kula or l'chumra. There we have a klal, l'chumra makshinan. but it has to be with exceptions. But the rule is that the seifa is the teacher and the reisha is the student. Okay, and therefore, there's a havamina without the kol. Why would we think that women are included in the lav when l'chora they should be exempt from eating matzah? Why? Because it's a mitzvah seisha asman gerama. Only
because. Is there any lav like that women are not included in? Like, I don't know, kosher or Shabbos or anything? I mean, usually any law applies both to men and women. I never.
Let me say like this, Danny. We have something similar when it comes to women in the obligations of Shabbos. Shabbos, the mitzvah like Kiddush, right? Zajac is Yom Shabbos lekache Aliyah. That's a mitzvah that says Shazman Gerama. Women are obligated midoraisa. Why? Same hekesh. Because sin shomer v'zachav v'dibur echad. Shomer means not to guard from not violating the negative. Their taka, what came first, Danny? Zachar, and then Shomer. Shomer is the teacher. Shomer is don't break the laws of Shabbos. Don't violate the lavin. Not violating is all women are included in that. So since the women are obligated in the Shomer, they're obligated in the Zachar. Mamish fits. It's a gavaldik klal. Okay, let's go back in the Gemara. Now, says the Gemara, hold on. Madanya. Umay chazes the high kol l'raboyanashim, and now there's nothing left. Umafkas eruvay, and therefore the pasuk that mentions kadis has no extra word to include taroivus chametz and kadis and taka. You're chayiv ba'azara, you're chayiv malkis, but you're not chayiv kadis. Why don't I say that the kol should come to include that even taroivus chametz is taka asur on the penalty of kadis, and women are exempt. Women are again. Let's take out women from the entire chiyuv because of this rule, like Tosfos says that the reisha mafad, the seifa mafadish l'reisha, and the women are not obligated in eating matzah because it's a mitzvah seisha asman geram. So answers the Gemara that it's mistaber that when you read a pasuk that's speaking about foods that you may not eat with penalty of kadis, that koi ba'archlin, a pasuk that's speaking about Oichalin means eaters. The Torah says whoever eats. It's not speaking about the food. It's not speaking about the chefs. It's speaking about the gavra. So if the pasuk is speaking about eaters, and there's an extra word kol, what is it being marbe? It's being marbe more eaters, not more foods. More foods means even taroivus chametz. More eaters means not only men, also women. A pasuk that's speaking about eaters not being allowed to eat, and then there's an extra word, it's being marbe another category of eaters, which is taka how we're learning. The kol is being marbe nashim. However, but to say that the word the pasuk is speaking about eaters, and the extra word is being marbe ne'echolim, things, a chefze, a taroivus chametz, that doesn't make sense. Now, that's not always the case. Says the Gemara, Maskav law, Rav Nassan Avua, Maskav law, Rav Nassan Avua of the Rafuna. Interesting. Or the Bereder Rav Nassan, or not the Bereder Rav Nassan, that the Chol Hecha the Koi by Cholin, are you telling me that if there's an extra word, you cannot be marbe? The Torah is focusing on the Gavra. You can't be marbe more ne'echolim, more foods that may not be eaten. It's not true. For Hatanya, a pasuk, a brayso based on a pasuk himself, the pasuk writes, Kichol Oichel Chelev Min Abehema Asher Yakriv. Now we know Chelev cannot be eaten not only from a carbon. Chelev cannot be eaten from any behema. But the pasuk there says, if you eat chelev from a carbon that's being offered, kadis. Says the brayso, ein lechelev tamimim. A chelev from an animal that's tamim, shiroi li karev, which is this pasuk, you're chayiv kadis. How do you know that if you have chelev from a balmumin, minayin that you're also chayiv kadis? Because the Torah says in that pasuk, min habehema, which is extra. So the min is an exclusion. The min. But we're not focusing on the word min from both. Min habehema, b'chlal don't write min habehema, so that is being marbe, even a balmumin. Chelev is chayv kadis. But now, chelev chulen minayin, so Talmud Leimer, ki kol, again from the word kol, now concludes the kasha in the Gemara. The pasuk is speaking about eaters, that whoever eats chelev, people who eat chelev, yidden, chayv kadis. And you have an extra kol, and what is the kol including? Another food item, another chefza, chelev, from a chulin, the korban and a chulin. So you could be speaking about oy chulin, and you could be marbe ne chulin. So the Gemara says, yeah, that's if you have nothing else to be marbe. Answers the Gemara, Hassan the leka oy chulin, There's no one else to include in the Isra of eating chaylev. Everyone is already included. So now that you have an extra word, you have to learn another food item, which is chaylev of chulin, marben and chulin. But over here, by Kaddish, you have two options. You can say kol is being marben more eaters, women, which is what we say. You can say that the kol is being marben taroivis chametz, which is what we don't say. Why not? Because hacha the ika oy cholin loy shaveklu loy cholin marben cholin. Nikoda. Beautiful. Okay, now we have a machlokes. Let's not forget, all of this began with the machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. Rabbi Eliezer is the one that holds that taroivis chametz is included. Ki kol machmetzes loy soichelu, the kol, and that's a lav. Taken not kodesh, but it's a lav. The Chachamim hold that if you eat taroivis chametz, like we quoted it, if you're not allowed to do it, but you're not chayav a lav. So that the Gemara now is focusing on the Shitas Chachamim who argue with Rabbi Eliezer. Says the Gemara that Rabbanon, the Leis Lahu Eruv, they don't hold that if you eat Taroivis Chametz Shechayiv Malkes. So Kol Loy Darshe, so that must be that they Rabbi Eliezer has an extra word. It must be that they don't darshan the Kol. So now the kasha is Elo Nashim Minalahu. So how do they know that Nashim are included? Like we mentioned. We can't apply the rule that always women are compared to men. We would not say that like we learned on top of the Amit. But everyone agrees that women are included in the Isra of eating chametz with the penalty of Kaddish. Where do they know it from? Answers the Gemara, Kol loy darshin. But you know what? In the pasuk of whoever eats machmetzes, you get Kaddish, the Torah says not just the word Kol, it says Ki Kol. For any. Not just an extra word kol, ki as well. Ki kol darshi. Ki kol is being marben noshim. Now hold on. The Rabbi Eliezer kol l'Rabbi says anoshim. So now comes the Bamba Kasha. So let's come back to what we began with. So why don't we say that the ki kol should be marben back eruvay that you're even going to get Kaddish? The whole answer was because kol is needed for noshim. But now you have a ki kol, and if you're going to tell me not. For Rabbi Eliezer, kol is extra. We learned from kol. In our case, remar ben noshim. But the word ki kol loy darshe, that's not true. I know that Rabbi Eliezer does darshan ki kol because vehotanya. Now this brayso is based on a pasuk that writes, guys, the pasuk in the beginning of Vayikra that kol hamincha shetakrivu Hashem loy seyasa chametz, and then the pasuk concludes ki chol so'oy. We can't be makriv so'oir chametz so'oir bal taktiru. Now, Ainley says the Braisa, I would think that when is a person, God forbid, going to be violating this issue of haktara? Haktara is only with a kazayis, elakuloi. Only when you bring on the mizbech and a kazayis of chametz, that's where this pasuk violated the law that we just quoted. Miktsasai minayin. Miktsasai. Now there are different ways of learning miktsasai, as we'll see soon. But miktsasai, according to Rashi, means not that you would be chayiv if you bring on the mizbeach less than a kazayis. Anything that's brought on the mizbeach less than a kazayis is not. You're not violating the law. It's not called a haktara. But what happens if what you bring on the mizbeach is a mixture? Some of it is so'oir, and some of it is not. You bring a kazayis, miktsasoi is, like Rashi writes, chatzi zayis is so'oir. You brought the other chatzi zayis of, non-chametzdika flour offering. How do you know that you will be chayiv? Tamaloimer kol. Now let's go further. What about the eruvay? Eruvay means not miktsasoi, that's not mixed, half and half, each one be'en. Eruvay means that you mix chametz dikado with non-chametz dikado. And when we learn menachas, there are so many karbonei smincha that you have to break them into pieces so you can mix them up together. And they're not even discernible. You have a sum total of a kazayas, but it's not all of chametz. Again, this is taroivis chametz. How do you know that you're also going to be chayiv? Because it says ki kol. In other words, what do we see over here? Says the Gemara. Man shamat lei de darish kol. We just established that the Chachamim B'chlal don't darshan kol, which means the author of this brayso must be Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Eliezer is learning two dinim. He's learning a din that when you have a half a kazayas so'oid, and a half a kazayas of normal matzah mincha, and they are not mixed together, you're chayiv because you brought up a kazayas, and even if you mix it together and they're not even discernible anymore, you're also going to be chayiv. So you see that Rabbi Eliezer darshans kol, and then he makes another drush kikol. So hakasha. The Gemara says kasha is takanat yufta, because you have to appreciate that once you are learning that as long as what you brought on the mizbeach is a sum total of a kazayas, if some of it was sa'od, you're going to be chayiv. Maybe there's no big difference whether it's mixed together or whether it's separated, right? The mitzvah, the Rashi teaches is be'en, and then Taroiva says you can't recognize them. Maybe that's all considered like one limud. Big difference. Over here, we're trying to make much more. Here we are saying that kol is being marbe oicholin. Look how different it is. Women, which everyone learns that way. And we are asking, why don't we darshan the key to be marbe another ne'echolin, taroivas chametz? That's mamash, a new limud. Taka Rabbi Eliezer doesn't learn that. But still, you see from this brayso that he learns from kol and then from kikol. So here we have a kasha b'shitas Rabbi Eliezer, but we finished the sugya of how Rabbi Eliezer learns that taroivas chametz is included in the lav. Kol machmetzes, kol barbe taroivas chametz. It's not included in the pasuk of a nichrasa, not included. That pasuk, the kol of a deer, is teaching you that women are included in the prohibitions and in the penalties of eating chametz. And now we have time to start a new sugya, which is connected to what we just learned. Amar Rabbo, Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Chavra, this is a Yoredei Dika sugya, right? The matzah chametz is a detail of it, but this is a very big rule. And here is the rule. The Amar Rabbo, Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Kol isurim Shabbat Torah. Ein heter mitztaref le'isur. That's the klal. A permitted substance does not combine with a prohibited substance to compose the minimum amount needed for the penalty. L'mashal, guys, look inside the Rashi. It's 18 lines before the bottom of the Amid. This klal of ein heter mitztaref le'isur, zogt Rashi, achal chatzi zayis chelev. And you ate chatzi zayis basar, bibas achas. So you ate a kazayis. You ate a kazayis. But half of that, part of that, right? Rashi gives an example of half was kosher meat. Half of it was chelev. We don't say ein heter mashlim es shiur ha'isur l'chayvay. Ooh, you ate a kazayis chelev. No, you did not. You did not. You did a ma'isa achila, but the lav and the penalty. Now, guys, Rabbi Yechanan is the one that holds chatzi shiros asur min ha'torah. We're not saying that it's permitted, but the penalty that we have for eating dafka kazayis, you'll only get if the whole kazayis was a davar ha'asur. And we don't say, since I ate a kazayis and some of it was asur, even half of it, we don't say that. Chutz mi isurei nazir. What's isurei nazir? Very important, guys. The Torah says, the Lashon HaPasuk is that the chol mishras anavim, that any food that's infused with wine may not be eaten. Lamashal, if you took bread and you dipped it into wine and a nazir ate it. Now, guys, obviously, if you have the shiur of wine in the bread, then of course he's chayiv. He consumed the minimum amount of wine that he may not consume. But what happens if you dipped bread into wine and you ate a kazayis? The kazayis is comprised both of the bread and of the wine that's in it. You did not eat a kazayis only a visser. There you're going to be chayiv. The nazir is going to be chayiv. Why? Because why did the Torah have to give this as an example by saying v'chol mishras hanavim? Anything that's infused with hanavim you can't eat. Why was that needed? If the Torah wants to tell you that if you dip bread into wine, if the shiur of wine is the shiur, complete shiur that's asur, and you consumed it, why you would think that just because you had it inside bread, it would be permitted? Of course it would be asur. When the Torah is writing that you can't have food, lamashal bread, infused with wine, what the Torah is saying is that even if you ate the minimum shiur, and the minimum shiur is not only from the anavim, it's the bread and the anavim, you're going to be chayiv. So that's the exception.
Why would I think chatzi chelev and chatzi basar kasher is chayiv?
Because I did a ma'isa achila tzemach. I ate.
But it's half kosher.
I know that, okay, but still, you see, by a nazir, let's go in the other direction. By a nazir, there's also the minimum share of a kazayas for him to get punished, for him to get malchus. If he did it bahasra, he violated a thou shall not. He only ate a sum total of a kazayas. Some of it was bread. The Torah says that if the bread had in it some liquid, some wine, some grape product, he's going to be chayiv malchus. But that's the exception. That's not the klal.
Rabbi, does it have to be a single bite? Is that the idea by a nazir? So it's
we're going to learn tomorrow. Share a lot about it. It's about eating it in the time toich kedei achilas pras, and in toich kedei achilas pras. Here in our case, by the nazir, you didn't eat the minimum amount of wine. In the whole toich, you ate a kazayas of the bread that had in it the wine, a kazayas of that. And there we say hatem instead of the guys. Zajac, let me answer your question better. Look at the next exception. How is it connected to Pesachim? Let's go weiter. So chutz misuri nazir, because the Torah needed to say mishras like we explained, and if not, it's completely superfluous. If you're having within the bread the minimum amount of wine, of course you'll be chayiv. And Zeidi says, af so'oid bal taktiru. That also, when it comes to the isur of, like we quoted the pasuk in Vayikra, that we're not allowed to be maktir a kezayis of so'oir. What happens if, this is mamish the brayse that we just learned, if what you bring on the mizbeach is just one kezayis, it's comprised of some so'oir and some matzah, you will be chayiv. I ain't haktorah, there's no haktorah pachos mikezayis. Here we say that heter is mitzdaref le'isr. Now, kiman zeiri is only has. How does he know that? It's Rabbi Eliezer the Darish Kol. So ask the want to hold on. Zeiri could have said something even better. Let's speak about eating chametz. Iachi. If Zeiri's statement is following Rabbi Eliezer, which by the way is also the Tan of our Mishnah in the beginning of the Perek, that holds that for taroivus chametz, we're learning about taroivus chametz. Your chayiv malchus, iachi daf mem dalid. So why didn't he say it? B'chlal le'inyan chametz b'pesach nami. Samach, there you go. If a person eats one kezayis, but it's not a kezayis of chametz, it's called taroivus chametz. In it there is some chametz. The rest of that kezayis is not chametz. Your chayiv malchus. And Adarabba, the Mishnah is for sure, Tarevus Chametz is Rabbi Eliezer. Why didn't Zeiri say it? So the Gemara says, first of all, Zeiri did not mean that he doesn't agree to that. Einachinami. Yes, that's what we meant to say. That not only is there an exception of the Isurei Nazir, but the other exception will be Chametz on Pesach. Tarevus Chametz midoy raisa. If you eat less than a kazayis of Tarevus Chametz, you're not going to get malchus. You didn't do a ma'aseh achila. If you ate, even though it's not all of a chametz, it's mitzdaref le'isr. Eloma, he wanted to emphasize the isr of bal taktiru, and that's something because the brayse that we learned it the way Zeiri learns it and not the way Abaya learns it. That's a whole different language. Ulafuke meda Abaya. When we learned the brayse, and the brayse says mitzasoy minayin, so we explained it the way Zeiri explains it. And how does Zeiri explain this brayse, which is Rabbi Eliezer? No one holds that if you bring something on the mizbeach and the sum total less than a kazayis, you're not going to be chayiv. It's not called a ma'aseh haktorah. The miktsasoi and the taroivus that the brayse was marbe, you are always bringing a kazayis. Miktsasoi means some of it is so'ir and some of it is matzah, not mixed together. Then, if you even mix them together, but you're only going to be chayiv if you brought up a sum total of a kazayis. Abaya learned pshat in the whole brayse different. There's a whole machlokas amoraim how to learn pshat in that brayse. Abaya understood pshat in the brayse mitzasoy minayin that no, the brayse is being mechadesh that the ma'aseh haktorah is called a ma'aseh haktorah even if you don't have a kazayis, even if you only brought a little bit. That's a whole different din. That ulafukim ed Abaya the amar yesh haktorah l'pachas mikazayis. By learning the brayse differently. So Kamash Malon Zeiri wants to make it clear that even the brayse that's machmer, haktorah lafachos mikazayis. You have to bring up a kazayis. The chiddush is that even though the kazayis is not only of so'ir, the kazayis is comprised of some heter and some iser, that heter mitzdaref le'isr. And yes, and for sure, when it comes to eating, when we learned the Mishnah, not only chametz nuksha, but taroivas chametz, that your chayiv malchus, it's bahazora, not because that will be the other exception where you taka, if you didn't eat a kazayas, sum total, you're not going to be chayiv malchus because you didn't eat. You ate. But hold on, I didn't eat a kezayis of chametz. It was taroivas chametz. That's the whole word. But by chametz, because of the Torah using the word kol, that's a doiraisa. That taroivas chametz is also balav. God willing to be continued. Good, getting clear.
Rabbi, just could you just quickly touch on again on the royal achilas kelev?
Very good, Sika. So like this, when you have something that's edible achilas adam, even if it now is starting to get ruined. By chametz on Pesach, we are more machmer than on other Yisuri Achila, and we say that as long as it is still royal Achila skelev, it's bona fide food. And you know what? If a person eats it, he's chayv kares. Chametz nuksha means chametz that cannot be eaten by a person, but it can be eaten by an animal. Chametz nuksha is of a lesser category. There's no Yisur kares because it's something that never became edible Achilas Adam. Like, for example, dough. Dough is not called something that's edible or Adam. So even when dough becomes chametz, becomes shiur, speaking about shiur, in that phase, it's still going to be a ledav meir, and according to our Mishnah, it's also midoiraisa, but it's not chiyuv kares because it's not roy lachilas adam. That's important. You got it?
So what about like that glue of the tzabayin or the
very good.
the shoemaker that was using?
Okay.
It's not royal, not the achilas adam, not the achilas kelev. So why did
No,
they mention?
no, wrong. So those cases of the Mishnah, which is chametz nuksha, the glue, it must be something that was never roy lachilas adam, but it's roy lachilas kelev. Good.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you speak out again the klal you said about hekation as applied to Shabbos? Because Shamor is the
second one.
The mitzvah aseh, right? No.
Shamor is no. Shamor is the lav. Shamor to guard. Shamor is the lav. Shamor isn't later. Works.
Shamor is the lav, and Zachor is the
aseh. And Zajac is written in Parshas Yisroi, and Shamor is written in Parshas Voschanon. And the Seifa is the teacher. Perfect. It works in all location. It's a good thing with a good